We're going to do some sculpting in Blender for this one, and I want to go over the Lumis method for drawing a head in 2D, and also the Asaro planner head, and this is going to help you when sculpting a lot inside of Blender, especially if you're trying to do the human head. One of the hardest things you can sculpt. It's one of the hardest things to get right, and so I wanted to go over this. Now, I'm not a character artist, so I don't know much about anatomy or anything like that, but I do know that if you practice these two here while sculpting, you're going to have a much better time when it comes to actually getting the shapes approximately correct anyways. And you can see here, these are some sculpts from a couple ZBrush artists, and they're just showing that basically a planner head can turn into the human head very fast, basically, with a little bit of smoothing and extra work done to it. So let's just get started in 2D, and we'll go over that Lumis method. It's really a simple method for just constructing the basic proportions of the head. That's all it comes down to for the most part. You can do it in the front, side view, perspective views as well. So basically you have an ellipse down the middle. You have this going on, and you chop a little of the ends off here, okay? It's going to square out something like this. You drop these down, okay? At the very center, we'll have like a little cross point. We have a cross point here, and we have a cross point here. We want one more, about equal length, cross point here. Flatten that out, and that's the bottom of the jaw, connected to those 2 points that we dropped down. Now, this is where the nose is going to exist for the most part. This is the eyebrow ridge, and now we can divide this in two. This is the top lip, okay? Something like this. And this is going to be the top of the chin, basically. So the eyeballs will go in this area, approximately, right? And if we were looking at this edge from the side view, it'd still be an ellipse, right? Something like this. You divide it in half, and then you'll end up with an ear in the back quarter there, right? So basically, in this view, we would only see something like this. And the head actually continues all the way up. This is the hairline, okay? And that's what we end up with. That's the basic idea of the Lumis method anyway, something along those lines. So in a side view, it's pretty much the same idea. An ellipse within an ellipse, and getting these close to each other is actually pretty important. Try that a few times, I guess. Jeez, should have warmed up before the video, huh? Anyways, we're going to do this one. So we do the cross section. These go forward, like so. This one's going to go a little bit extra forward because we're going to drop this down flat like this, evenly spaced. All right, drop that down. And then that's what we get for the jaw, basically. So now the nose would exist here. Divide that in two. This will be your upper lip. Try that again. There you go. And bottom lip. And the chin. All right. Eyebrow ridge, just like that. There you go. So this is going to work all the way back around. It's not always perfectly spherical. Sometimes it flattens out a bit, sometimes it doesn't. And it's going to work back around to this side. It's actually going to be a little bit shorter, more than likely. And so we'll end up with something more like this. And we'll work this one out and work it up like that. Okay. Something along these lines anyways. And that's the basic idea of the Lumis method, right? So when you're sculpting, you can eyeball your proportions a little bit easier by just doing a couple lines across the surfaces and creating a spherical shape, more or less. You'll end up with similar results to this anyways. So if we were doing this in perspective, basically drawing a sphere in perspective, still an ellipse, but you end up doing something like this, right? And if you chop a little of the ends off by doing extra ellipses, we can do that. We can also put an ellipse through here, possibly, and an ellipse through here, okay? A little bit confusing if you've never drawn in perspective, but basically this one will come a little bit forward because it's not quite, it's supposed to be flat from here. So it's like this line going down, right? So we'll end up with our points. We'll end up with the next point. Drop those down still. Create the chin or the jaw, the bottom of the jaw. And there you go. So now this would be divided. That's the ear. Okay. The ear would be over here too. We might just barely see it. Now we have the nose, ridge of the eyebrow, Eyes, just like that. Top of the lips, usually like a little bird shape. And then when drawing it, you can just square it out if you want. Or you can do things a little bit more elaborate, perhaps. But this is the basic idea of the Lumis method, right? Something along these lines, even though it's a pretty shoddy example. But from the corner of the chin to the center point of that cylindrical shape, you flatten it out a little bit, right? That's how you'll end up creating more or less the human head, something along these lines. You'll do that in 3D as well, but it's going to be quite a bit different when actually trying to achieve that with these sculpting tools, right? So we're looking at these kinds of shapes. So this here at the top kind of chamfers as well. Go out to the corner of the eye, basically, something like this. And that chamfer goes around and back around like this. Kind of feeds back into itself at a certain point. So that's something also to take note of. And that gives you like the temple area for the most part. The cheek, right? Usually from the top of the ear out straight forward, something like this. It does two kind of things. It kind of goes back in and it goes down. It creates like this little Y shape that you can turn into like a triangle. That's going to give you the cheek, more or less. All right. So the planar head is actually really great for practice. Basically, all you're going to be doing is looking at this while sculpting, thinking about the Lumis method while you do it. And then you're going to try to create all these planes, more or less, right? And if you can do that, generally you'll have more or less proper kind of setup as far as like proportions go and the angles of the faces and things like that. Now, that's not all there is to anatomy. So I don't study anatomy. I'm not a character artist. I don't always do this the best, but if you put some time, energy, and effort into practicing that, that's good practice. However, you're going to want to pick up more resources on understanding anatomy. And there's books out there called Anatomy for Sculptors. I'm put a link to their art station. They actually have tons of references for free. But Anatomy for Sculptors is really great. And so you can take a look. They're basically going over the idea of blocking out more or less a sphere and a cylinder with a neck. And that starts to generate more or less the Lumis head. And then they're going to turn it into a planar head, more or less. And they're going to go through that same kind of exercise almost on a lot of their examples anyways. But they also have some really great examples on other things, like, for example, the superficial fat pads. So when you're thinking about sculpting, after you do kind of those planar surfaces, you can actually start to create a little bit more organic type shapes in little sections like this. So you'd be recreating little shapes everywhere in order to build up the structure of the face. And so that's just a great resource in my opinion, but practice this one here for sure. You know, start with like the Lumis head, and the Lumis head has a planar version of it, by the way, but most people don't use it because it's not quite as detailed as the Asaro planar head. And then, so you practice doing that, and then you can start adding on like muscle and fat and creating more interesting kind of construction there. But there's a really tricky part of this that is going to throw you for a loop, and that is the proportions. So this is like ideal proportions for like typical like male face perhaps, or you could turn it into a female face. But those are kind of like your ideal proportions. And human beings in real life aren't like that. Okay. So you can practice this, but at a certain point, you're going to want to like step away from it to some degree where you're trying different proportions, because how much you space things apart from each other has a dramatic influence on how much different this model or the sculpt that you end up with is going to look, right? So just as much as like trimming off the sides here is going to make the face more narrow or more wide, basically, by doing that. So there's lots of things that can come into play with this strategy while sculpting, all right? So we're just going to play around with the idea of that, working off just the references there real quick. So this video, we're going to just be focusing on the human head and not so much like hard surface stuff, but basically when you're sculpting in Blender, and this video was made originally because some people wanted to know more about sculpting in Blender. It's very close or very similar to drawing in 2D. That's really the trick with sculpting anyways. It's almost like one-to-one relatable in some ways. And so when we're drawing in 2D, you know, you got to think about things that we're doing. Like if we're putting in a brush stroke and like we're sculpting, sometimes, you know, we got to do multiple passes on the same little setup there. Sometimes we got to do like little gradients, right? We got to do things like that. Try to make them, you know, the surfaces pop out just a little bit or whatever the case. And then, but we also have to think about the smooth tool being something like a blender tool or a blender smudge blur tool here in Krita. And we might soften only one side of an edge, right? And this is also very critical to understand. Sometimes you soften both sides of the edge and you end up with like a little thin strip in the middle. So this kind of brushwork is almost identically transferable to sculpting, because basically you might start a stroke very sharp or hard. You might fade it out. And remember, we're using graphics tablet for this. We're not going to try to do this with the mouse. It doesn't offer enough control necessarily. But this is the kind of thing we might be doing in sculpting, similar like things. And we might also be flattening surfaces out. So if we had a gradient, okay, and we use the smooth tool while sculpting, that's going to be the equivalent of the blender blur brush again. And if we just use it very heavily, that flattens the color, okay? So this is something that we can do to create those planar surfaces, is just using the smooth tool, because it's a Laplacian smooth, right? And it acts just like a blender blur brush in 2D. So when we come over here, we delete this, we press Shift A, we create a UV sphere. And now we got that, we can Control Tab into sculpt mode. And we're gonna go ahead and remesh this. So we're gonna press R to remesh, set the resolution, and then Control R will do that number, okay? So we're gonna be using the voxel remesh to do the rough sculpt, and then later on you retopo it to do a higher fidelity sculpt, right? So we got that going, and we understand, good. Let's do symmetry on X. We can use something like the scraper or even the smooth tool to start flattening out these sides here. So if you're kind of new to sculpting in general, the graphics pin that you're using, set the bottom barrel button to middle mouse click. And that way you can just orbit around, and top barrel button can be like right click, okay? And then what you do is you use a keyboard in conjunction with this. So if you control bottom barrel button, you zoom in and out. You shift bottom barrel button, Alt bottom barrel is middle click, right? So we can Alt middle click and gesture for bottom barrel, right? So we can get into the left view, right view, and side view very quickly with just the graphics tablet, or you can hit the tilde key and you can view left, view right, top, bottom, all that fun stuff. So right now, I just go in here and I hold down Shift. So our brushes, let's kind of go over that real quick. We're using the draw tool, pressing F, change size, Shift F changes strength, okay? Up here, pen pressure sensitivity is on for strength. We don't have it for radius right now. We might use that later. But basically, you draw, it pushes the surface out. You hold Control, it pushes the surface in. We hold Shift, it smooths. So we're using the smooth tool. If we select the smooth tool and hit Shift F, we can change the strength on this if needed. If you feel like it's too aggressive, change the strength on it. Go back to your draw tool, and it won't be quite as aggressive, all right? So just keep that in mind. Kind of liked where it was, so I'm going to go back. And if I just hold down Shift and start smoothing, you might have to push a little extra heavy, or just kind of do it in little small circles like this, and you'll end up with more or less flattening of the side there, okay? We don't cut it off like we were in the 2D drawing, but we just flatten it down, right? And so here's a thing that you want to do probably. The mask tool and the grab tool, all right? You're going to want to recreate these brushes probably with an option on them where the fall off is set to projected. Now you could set it on the brush and just use it, that's fine. But you go to the brush tab over here, the tool tab, and you can click this drop down. You can duplicate one of these tools, okay? So duplicate them, it'll ask for a name, and then you set that duplicate to projected, okay? And then you can just click here again, and you can save over the asset. All the default ones you can't save over, but basically you would save over that asset, and then you would end up with a new brush. That's what this is right here, the mask through. I call it mask through and grab through, all right? And the main reason for this is if we were using the grab tool, and we grab like this, like maybe a little bit from the side, you see it only grabs the side there. But if you had it set to grab through and you pull, it'll grab all the way through the mesh, okay? That's kind of important in my opinion. And instead of toggling them, just setting it to projected is way better of a workflow, because what's going to happen is you'll leave it on projected by accident and you'll really screw up your sculpts possibly. So just be careful with that. But you can create a new brush really easily. That's how you do it. And that's just one setup that you might want to use. Now, I want to mask through because I want to select kind of that same area that we would be manipulating on the Lumis method, right? So we mask through like this. And the mask has a pie menu, it's A. So we can invert, clear, doing all this fun stuff. So if I invert the mask, we can do that. And now we can use like grab through, for example, and we can pull this down very easily. So we'd probably pull this down a little bit, not too far, and then pull it down again and pull it down again. We can pull this whole area down over here on the backside. So we can start to create more or less the base of the mesh here that we want to work with. So this works out quite well. We can hit R, just change your resolution a little bit every time you remesh. It doesn't have, you can go up or down with it, doesn't matter. But just a little bit, and then Control R, remesh. You'll see the mask gets all messed up because the topology before looked like this, and when we remesh, it looks like this, right? So now we can A, clear the mask. We can use something like a scraper, for example, and we can start to work this down a little bit, perhaps, in this area. Start bringing it inwards where that chin would be. And because of the way the Lumis method worked, when we draw sharp, we went from the corner of the chin up to the center, right? This is kind of an angle that we want to create in here. And if we don't scrape it a little bit more, we probably won't end up with it. So basically, we're going to take this edge off a little. And we're going to start working that backwards. And that's kind of your starting point for like the human face anyways. That's the easiest way to think about it, is just doing that. Okay. Very easy to start up perhaps and get going. We're going to just scrape all that down a little bit. You could probably scrape the bottom a little. Do little circles with the scraper can work out quite well. We can flatten this a little bit if we need to, or leave it a little bit rounded. It's up to us. All right. So, but that for the most part will work out pretty well. We can use the regular mask tool now. We don't go all the way through the mesh. And we can grab from like right here to the back of the head a little bit. We're in this territory. We can press A, we can invert, and we can actually just use the move tool. And we can grab it and pull it down. And we can scale, bring it down. You can see it's going to scale back to that center point there. So when you're using the scale tool in Sculpt here, set pivot, pivot under cursor should be a shift right mouse. I think they updated that, so it's the default setting in Blender now. But if it's not, just right click this and assign it to shift right mouse. So when you shift right click, or in our case, using the pin, top barrel button and shift, we can now set it in that position. We can flatten it out that way if we wanted to. That may be just one way we want to do that, so we can actually work out a neck, something like this, and we can move it around. Of course, we'll want to remesh this, obviously, but we might also want to scale it. So we can use the scale tool, maybe just bring it out a little bit, you know, something like that for now. So lots of cool ways of working with sculpting, obviously, but really what it comes down to is just your ability to control the mesh a lot of times with the brushes and some of the tools. And it's not really anything more than that. Once you understand like each tool and how it works and behaves, you'll start discovering maybe more and more combos on how you can work with them together. And it works out quite well. So I'm going to Control R, remesh it. You can see, clear the mask, boom. And we can also use the trim tools. We got line trim, polyline trim, and lasso trim. So polyline, we click, 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 and it'll cut. Basically, it does a Boolean more or less is what it's doing. So we actually have to remesh after doing that. You can see it also creates a face set, which can be useful, but I'm not going to be working with face sets in this one. So we're going to turn that off, and we'll have that. We'll just Control R, it'll remesh like so. So after doing one remesh, probably need to, okay? There's also the option of using the line trim, which is quite useful. So if we click and drag out this way, you can see the gradient going towards the bottom. That means it's going to cut in that direction. If we had clicked and dragged the other way, it'll cut the other way, right? So if you ever go kind of the wrong way, you can also tap F and flip it and cut things in that manner. So like if we're doing the idea of the neck combining to the shoulders or something, and we need to do that number, we can, right? So that's quite useful. We can also add primitives to this. So if we Shift A, create a mesh and a cylinder, we can go ahead and do that. We can move it around, rotate it, scale it, do all that fun stuff. S and Z or X, actually, like say you're moving and you hit Z twice, it'll go on local orientation. So if you rotate in object mode, you get rotation values. This is what's kind of critical here, because now we can SZ twice and we can scale on Z. We can move it around, all right? If you took an object that you scaled non-uniformly like this, you can see all these numbers aren't perfectly the same. You go into sculpt mode, you get a warning. It says non-uniform scale. Go back to object mode, Control A, apply scale. That'll one it out. So now it won't give you that warning. All right. So we need the bottom of the neck there, basically something like so. We can actually just create it as a primitive shape like that and just start working with it if we wanted to, right? And so we can actually go into sculpt mode with just the cylinder, press R. We can actually remesh that one as well. So if you ever feel that it's better for you anyways to work with multiple objects, and there's times that you're going to want to do that, you got to set symmetry on for this one as well, because each object, that symmetry option is dependent on each object basically. But if you ever felt the need to go in here and just sculpt on separate objects, you could certainly do so. Sometimes it's hard to tell them apart when they're all gray together, and I'll talk about shading here for just a moment. But basically, I'm using a matte cap. This is one you can download off my Gumroad. I called it ZBrush Gray. But the main thing is that you can use a matte cap. You can turn on cavity, which helps a little bit. You set it to both, perhaps. I got backface culling on, which we're not going to worry about right now because we're not going to get into it. But the main thing is, like, you could use by default it's set to material, right? I'm using object colors. I got my objects set to white. For whatever reason, it makes it a little bit brighter, and I kind of like that. But the you can use random as well. So you see this a lot in like sculpting videos and stuff like that. So if you need to tell your objects apart from each other, use random. It's the easiest way to just tell them apart without having to assign colors to them and stuff like that. So I'm going to keep it together though for now, and we can go back into object mode perhaps. So we can always take this piece here and this piece here, and we can hit Control J. Whoop, grab this, and we can hit Control J, and we can join them together. Okay. So if I Alt Z, we can X-ray through it. You'll see they're combined together now as one object, but they still, are intersecting each other. When we're in sculpt mode, and let's say we hit R and we bump up the resolution a bit, and we remesh, it gets rid of all that's internal there. So you don't do Boolean unions necessarily. You can just join them together and remesh it, and it'll do that. It's quite useful, maybe. Keep that in mind. All right. You will run into sculpting issues rather fast if you're using the remesher, if you have any holes. Right. So if I select all this down here in edit mode, hit X and delete the faces, you'll see this is where backface culling, it doesn't show the interior faces like that. There actually is none. Blender double side renders things for whatever reason. But this is, it's a big hole in the bottom. So if we try to remesh something like this and we go into sculpt mode and hit R, set the resolution, Control R it, we'll get this. Anytime you have a hole, this is going to happen, all right? So one of the things you might do is go into edit mode. If that happens, you can do A twice, deselect everything, and then you can select by various things up here anyways. So, but one of them that we're looking for is you might have to be in a specific mode for it, I think. Yep. So instead of being in face selection, you might have to be in like edge selection. And when you do that, you can select non-manifold. Okay. That's going to show you where your holes are. So if you Alt Z, you should find blue, or in my case, at least blue lines with the theme, but you'll find edges that are highlighted, and that'll be where you want to just grab them and, repair it, basically merge vertices together if needed, or grab the open ends and press F, you can fill it. So now your remesher will work again, basically. All right. We go back to sculpt mode, hit R, Control R, no problems, because there's no holes in the mesh. You need an airtight mesh, basically. You use voxel remeshing. But this gets us started with the basic idea of the human head anyways. And so now we can use something like draw sharp. We can get in here, and just like when we were doing with the Lumis method, we can actually identify where we need our lines to exist, perhaps, where the ear will possibly exist. Those will go forward, obviously. And so we'll have a hairline up here at some point. Sometimes leaving the sphere a little bit faceted helps for this. Slide it, smooth it down. And so we got that going. We got the placement of the chin. We got the side of the jaw and everything. It's going okay at this point, right? This would also come forward. Okay. And right here, that's where the nose would exist, right? The eyes somewhere in this area, which we'll do later. And then down here, we split this one twice, right? If needed. And this will become the lips at some point. Something along these lines anyways. and this will become the chin. So we'll have the little lines that go up to the nose will get its little sides there, and then that's pretty much the whole process of at least identifying where things go. Like, this is what you're gonna end up doing. So when you're doing your own characters later on, if you use something like the grab tool and you made the eye section, for example, go up higher, you see how it deforms everything? You could use the mask tool maybe and say maybe you don't want to change the bottom if you're happy with that, or the sides too much. You can use the grab tool. You could possibly pull these up, right, in little sections maybe. So actually, probably starting on the outside on this one would work better. Okay. So you could pull that up, but then you would have to remember you got to pull the ear up as well. Okay. So just keep that in mind. We're not going to switch it up here, but that's the main idea. All right. Now, talking about the brushwork, right? Like I was saying, that's very similar to 2D. There's always various brushes you can use. There's like clay strips, which can be quite nice. It's very sharp though. You could go into brush and turn tip roundness up. It'll be a little bit softer now. Okay, so clay strips can be softened up if you need it. Very useful for just building up structure in areas. It's just a build-up tool, basically. The same is true for clay, but clay has a little bit of an interesting behavior to it. It acts like a wax tool, and when you're using it, what it's doing is it's auto-smoothing. You can turn that off and turn the pin pressure sensitivity off for it. It's just like clay strips, but it's round, okay? So that's the only difference between those two. You have crease polish and you have crease sharp. So of course, if you're, when you use this tool, it's going to start pinching the topology together. So it's going to create a crease, or you can hold control and you can do that. Sometimes that's useful. But a lot of times you'll find that you can use draw and draw sharp instead of crease or crease sharp. And so we can actually get in here with like draw sharp, and it'll just do this number like so. We can hold control. Okay. Draw tool, also same deal, but it's just bigger. It's more broad, right? The inflate tool is really good for organic stuff because a lot of times you just want to add a little bit of curvature to a surface. You can just inflate it a bit, all right? Just do little circles, use it very light pressure. You'll have a good time with that. If you ever have a hole somewhere in your mesh while you're working on it, you can always use the fill tool, go in and kind of fill it back in a little bit. You can see if we go around the edge of the sphere here, it kind of causes problems. So this one can be usually very useful, but you got to be careful using it, okay? It's fill and deepen. So if you hold control, it doesn't just do a fill, it does a deepen. And it's actually kind of like the old scraper, the way Blender's scraper used to be. So it's actually fun to use this one sometimes to fill in places and also scrape at the same time. So you can do that, right? Now, a plateau tool is going to create flat surfaces, basically. Okay, it's going to lock onto like the circle in its direction, like the angle that it's at. It's just going to start flattening surfaces. So this is very good if you need to create super flat surfaces. We won't be using that. We won't talk about it. But basically, the scraper, we've already kind of maybe been playing around with the idea of scraping with the smooth tool. But basically, it flattens out the surfaces a little bit, but you can dig with it as well. Right, so it's a little bit different than the smooth tool necessarily. Scraper is really great just for, well, knocking off edges like we did, right? It's also a fill tool, so if you hold control, it fills as well. Keep that in mind. Same is true with the trim. The trim is a different type of scraper, basically. It locks the circle position, so you see like the circle rotates around with the mesh. If we start here, it locks that direction of that circle, so it allows us to push the circle in like this. Okay, so that's pretty much all the trim tool does. It locks to that normal. Okay, and there's gonna be any number of other ones that you end up using, but grab tool and grab elastic are quite useful, or elastic grab as they call it. Snake hook can also be very useful. I mean, all this can be useful at some point if you want to use it, but the snake hook's kind of interesting. It's way over here, the regular one. There's an elastic snake hook as well, but basically you can pull out little details like this if you need to. It's kind of an interesting way of just working, right? If you want to do that. So, and then of course we got cloth brushes, paint brushes down here for coloring and stuff like that, but we're not going to get into that. So we'll go back to the draw tool. And really when I was learning to sculpt, this is all I ever used was the draw tool and the smooth tool, maybe a scraper and masks. That's it, right? So we can start to look at that Asaro planner head, right? And what we're looking for, we already identified where things are starting to go. We don't do detail yet, so we're not going to do the eye engraved detail or the lips engraved detail, but we're going to start trying to create more or less kind of these planar surfaces to some degree. And we can use a scraper to do that, or just a regular draw tool or clay strips, and we smooth it down and flatten it out, or we scrape it down, right? And since most of this is very rounded like this, the scraper doesn't work out well. So we can use clay strips or draw, up to you. And we can hold control, push this in. This is why you see a lot of guys that start sculptures in digital. They start with like this kind of a method, okay? Something they don't maybe fully explain in time-lapse videos or tutorials even. But they're basically doing this. They're practicing creating these planes first of the face, more or less. And so you can add a little bit of detail there. If you smooth, it's very aggressive. You kind of want that to happen. So that way, basically, what you can do is nudge it around very quickly and then very lightly smooth it. But if you need to flatten something, you can hold shift down and smooth until it's flat, basically. So like over here, like this needs to cut in a little bit for the planner head example. And then the upper lip builds up a little bit, and it's actually going to drop down around like this a little bit. And this is going to create this little effect here for that upper lip. And so you can see it's already starting to kind of get into position. It's not really too crazy. And that's kind of the key there, right? It's just starting to work out already. And the lips here are very flat right now. You see they're almost like a straight line across. That's not what you want either. So sometimes you're probably going to want to try doing this where you push in this area and smooth it a bit. And you want to create like the look of a jaw, right? Like if you were looking at the skull, it's kind of curved with the teeth. You might want to try creating that shape first and then just work it out a little bit. In low detail, obviously. We're not going to go too crazy with this. But basically, you're going to create that upper lip in that same kind of fashion. And then later on, this will get pushed in a little bit and flattened out. Okay. And it creates like these little, there's like these little fat pieces here. But the bottom lip is more or less, it kind of blends in and out of the top lip, something like this. And so you'll have to practice this, and it's easier to do when it's a little higher resolution to get more detail out of it. But it's going to look kind of cartoonish at first, maybe. That's the main idea. And so now you can start building up like the idea of the chin. And this is where you start relying off of not only the Asaro planner head, but like you start relying off of your anatomy references as well, possibly. Because there's certain things that the planner head just doesn't really show very well. But it does get you into kind of the correct territory for the most part. So, you know, we can start working this in this manner. We can push this in a little bit heavier right up to the eyebrows. You can see how this starts to work out. So just the smooth tool and draw tool is really going to get you started up pretty well. This will cut backwards, something like this for a little bit. And the shape here, so the Asaro planner head's great, but there's also a Lumis planner head. And the Lumis one, I kind of like the eyebrows on it more, but it's very simple. It's like half of a hexagon or something like that. It's very simple. It goes around like that, okay? And the Asaro one does something similar, but it's just a little bit different. So we can start to work into this area like this. And we can start to flatten this area down here. It should be kind of sharp in the back, basically. So there should be like a straight line almost, which we'll work into at some point. But I'm trying to get this little flat planner section right here going like so. So I'm just going to move it around and smooth it, move it around and smooth it. And this is really the whole trick to sculpting, guys. It's just about nudging things around, taking your time a little bit, especially as you're learning, and just trying to work them out deliberately, okay? So from the cheek here, right? The cheek is going to be pulled out of basically this area for the most part. And it's going to go to the top of the ear, something like this. And then there's a slight dip perhaps right here, and then it smooths out a little bit. For the planner head example anyways, this is what we're looking at. So now we're just trying to draw in these planner shapes more or less, right? That's all we're going to be doing basically in this video, is just going through and drawing out these shapes and trying to smooth them out and create them more and more accurately. So you'll have a lot more control if you practice this a few dozen times, basically. So that cheek kind of runs out from here to there, and it goes back out in this direction a bit. all right? And it goes back out in this direction. That creates that little triangular shape, Y shape or whatever. And that flattens out right there. Okay. So we'll have to nudge things around very carefully. This builds up, comes back up. Okay. And because of that reason, this over here can be flattened out. And you can see how this all starts to work together. But basically, you can, in fact, with very limited knowledge in sculpting and anatomy, using that reference, you can actually make this happen. You'll just have to Google it and find it. And it's really, really simple to get into this idea of sculpting human heads. It's really hard to master, though, I'd say. It's not as easy to just master it. But you can see how this all starts working out anyways. It's a quite clever way of doing things anyways. So this will work out a little bit more. It's supposed to be more triangular, but kind of screwed that shape up, didn't I? All right, so we could take our time and get this very close to perfect the way we would want it. But it's not always going to come out obviously perfect. There's a little triangle shape back here that's also generated. It goes up to the height of that one, like this. So, you know, if you don't level this out first, like basically you're controlling the level or the gradient of the surface. Remember, gradient in like a physical form would be like the slope of something, basically, right? And then, so it's just like shading, right? I'm telling you, it's just like doing 2D artwork. It's very similar. This would fill in a little bit more up here and gradient out. So that would create that little tapered effect there. This would also jump out a little bit here by the looks of it and come down. Okay, so that creates the gradient there. This can be filled in a tiny bit maybe. And we'll end up with another gradient there. So it does take some time to get used to doing this. It's not like an instant. You're going to be great at it the first time. You'll probably create something atrocious looking. That's fine. But you can keep practicing this idea until you feel fairly comfortable with creating these planar sections, right? And getting them in the correct positions. And you could do each and every single one of them. I'm kind of doing more of a broad take here where I'm not doing everything exactly the way it looks in the image, but we're getting the process going anyways. And we can start to figure out like where we're going right and maybe where we're going wrong. And there's really subtle, nuanced issues in here. If things start to smooth weird, just remesh, okay? Just Control Alt and remesh. I'm going to take the resolution up a little bit and then remesh, okay? So I like to work from low to a little bit higher, generally speaking, and try to just key in on the shapes that I'm trying to create and not try to necessarily get them right the first go around. I'm getting them close, and then I'm going to come back and just keep retouching them, basically. And that's kind of the strategy I think you'll see a lot of sculptors use. They just kind of round robin the whole project. They do a little bit, they do a little bit more, they do a little bit more. And so it's a very iterative process. They just keep going for it, basically. You can see already, without any real knowledge about anatomy, you know, we're creating the structure to some degree, right? Of the human head. And that's kind of the main thing here is that's what we're trying to do or achieve. Okay. You don't have to be an expert at everything and understand all the terminology and you don't have to know all of that off the bat. The most important thing you can practice is going to be creating things by very carefully observing them, whether that's modeling or sculpting or whatever the case, drawing and sketching. You want to be very careful and observe all the little edges, all the little gradients, how the lighting interacts with the surfaces, things like that become extremely critically important, in my opinion, for that, right? So now we got that pretty much going. I don't worry so much about flattening this out. I don't think it's that important. But if you wanted to, you could go through and facet all that out. I'm just going to smooth it out for now and just lightly touch that eyebrow ridge. Okay. So we got that going. That's good. We got to do the ear section a little bit, maybe. So ears are a little bit tricky. I'm not going to do this in grave detail for this video, but it can be a little bit tricky. You start with a mask, maybe press A and invert it. A lot of times you can do that, and then you can just take the sculpt tool, pull it out a bit, okay? And so there's kind of like a base of the ear that's a little bit thicker than you probably realized. and then it runs pretty close to flush in the front, right? And there's like a little angle to it. So if we do this and we push in the ear, this is a decent starting point, right? But we might need more resolution to work any kind of detail into this, right? But we can take our time. We can remesh it as needed. We can use something like the inflate tool if we wanted to. We can kind of inflate this area. Now I'm going to do something a little bit wrong here. Not all of this is perfectly rounded. Some of it gets kind of flat. You got to pull, maybe use a grab tool, regular grab tool. You might have to pull this little area down. You might have to pull the ears out. There's all kinds of fun stuff here that could still happen. But a lot of people try to do this too narrow in the back. And what happens is when you remesh, you control R, if let's say we had done like, I don't know, crease sharp in this area. We had made this way too narrow like this, and we remesh, you'll get some really nasty topology sometimes where it looks like, I don't know, it's a bunch of goo like slimed together or whatever. Let's see if I can get it to do it. Okay, yeah, kind of like that almost. You know, if you remesh at a higher resolution, that goes away usually to some degree, but it doesn't always. Here's the deal. Just use the fill tool. Don't fight that. Don't do creases that sharp, okay? Remesh it, a little bit higher resolution again. Okay, just fill it in, smooth it if needed, fill art until you're back to this. That's all you can do for now. Don't try to stress that too much. It's not like that anyways in reality, right? So that's just maybe a mistake you might make. But yeah, we can kind of structure this all and start getting it going. Just use the draw tool half the time. You can start making all those shapes that you need to create. And this area kind of flattens out in here a little bit, and it might even start coming back out a little bit. Like sometimes some people have some pretty pronounced areas in here where it's like this, right? That's fine. But it turns into like a little Y shape, basically. Something along these lines. And that's more or less what you're going to end up doing. I think I got the shapes just wrong a little bit, but something along those lines. And just doing it by memory right now, so it's probably a little bit off. But and guys, I'm not a character artist. I don't study anatomy. I don't really focus on people at all. And with enough time, energy, and effort, I know I can pull off a person if I needed to, just following some of these basic strategies, right? Just very cleverly, very lightly going through and correcting things is huge. A huge part of this, that's definitely wrong. Let me pick up a reference real quick. I know that shape's just slightly off. Okay, actually, it's not as off as I thought it was going to be, but it's still off. So it comes out over here and it dips a lot more. It might be a little bit sharper, but I don't think I have entirely the resolution I need to do that. So we'll try it, thinning it a bit maybe. All right, and then we can push this in. So look at references, guys. Don't try to imagine the ear. Push that in, create the little hole, and then do that little section like that. And this will start to come out right here. It connects to this a little bit. You can smooth that out, flatten that surface maybe. It's like, yeah, a little dip right there, basically. So, you know, not quite enough resolution maybe to do a really detailed pass, but it's just enough resolution to get in here and start playing around with the idea of the ear anyways. So it doesn't have to be as hard as you think it does. You just have to practice it. It's kind of like one of those, like when you start trying to do this, it's one of those subjects where, you know, at first it seems extremely complicated, but as you do it more and more, it starts to be like, oh, this is easy, you know? And to some degree it is. So maybe hard to master, but it's definitely a little bit easier to get going than you realize. And then once you start having a little bit of fun with it, and that's kind of the cool thing. Like it all kind of snaps together in your head and you're like, oh man, I can actually do this. And it's not really as crazy as I thought it was maybe. All right. So for simplicity's sake, we're going to not, you know, do everything here. Eventually you'll have like a muscle that goes back and forward here. That's kind of a big one. So you might think about doing that. I do want to mention something that if we were sculpting this in, right? Let's say we were doing it back here. I'll just do it smaller. Sometimes when you sculpt certain things, like you see how the mesh, well, it's not really doing it. Maybe we can get it to work in here. See how the mesh kind of like pinches together almost though? And it will overlap each other at some point usually, although we're having a hard time making that happen. It would normally happen right there. But basically, yeah, like they can overfold on each other. Just remesh it, and then the folds will combine basically. All right, that's all I was trying to point out there. We'll eventually get to that point, and it'll start happening. So I'm going back to the planner head example, so I can just kind of keep working with it, and we'll start trying to lay in some of these surfaces some more. I mean, really, you can take your time here. Don't rush it. You know, you should be able to clearly kind of see what it is you're trying to do or create to some extent. And you don't have to do everything perfectly planner, but it certainly can be useful to get started with the planner shape and then work it out from there. Okay. So I'm just trying to get this area going a little bit different, perhaps. Where this, I tend to drop all the way around a lot of times. And it makes working this area just a little bit easier, I think, later on when you're trying to add a more detailed mouth anyways. And then this can like build up in this area. It's like a little cylindrical shape that comes out and this dips, right? And the chin sometimes runs up into that area, something like that, maybe. So there's all kinds of little nuanced details on surfaces that you'll be tackling when looking at like photographic reference. So just keep that in mind. You're going to, at some point or another, want to load up images of an actual human being, maybe do a likeness sculpt, practice doing things in extreme detail to help you grow as an artist. And that's when you're going to really find that the human face is so dramatically different in some ways compared to other people, right? So, like this is probably too high here. I could probably bring that down a little. Something as simple as that, that changes the angle of the plane here. Something as simple as that, though, can have a dramatic influence on the ending result of your the individuals you're trying to create, basically. So, lots of little things like that start to add up, more or less. All right. But overall, I'd say we're on our way, and it's just a matter of time now before we can actually work things into more proper kind of a setup. Anyways, you know, we can add little bits of curvature here or there and smooth them down either heavily or just a little bit. Really up to us. A lot of guys like to inflate this little area just a bit, actually towards the bottom, and then they kind of flattens out more towards the top. It's a pretty common strategy there as well. So bring the nose in a little bit. There is a little bit of a buildup on the side of the nose, like in this area. So just keep that in mind. And it might get a little thinner up here towards where the eye would be. The eye, I like to do it with the sphere and then just work the sphere into the base mesh, basically. So, but you could sculpt the eye as well. And you can even do, like, if you're doing statues, which this is something you'll find quite regularly, is if you're doing like environment art and you're trying to do static meshes for those environments, you might end up sculpting out a piece of the environment, such as like a statue or something. And you might, instead of doing realistic eyes, you end up doing a more like chiseled marble kind of looking eye, which is a different kind of a way of working an eye. So do look into that if that's something you're trying to do. I don't really typically care for that drop there like that being too high. Sometimes they blend together depending on the person, but sometimes they're really rigid still. So the judgment call on the character you're creating, basically, or you're going to try to create. But yeah, I mean, look, not real pretty necessarily, but it's on its way and it's kind of going, and that's kind of the cool thing. So let's take this a little step further. Let's do the eye. Since we got more or less a mouth started and we got a the ear going, let's do a sphere, a UV sphere. I'm going to bring it in, right click and shade it smooth. I don't like these faceted, but I like the base mesh faceted. It's kind of weird, but we just scale it down, put it into position, and trying to get the position just right. It's going to be a little bit of trial and error, I think. Even for myself, I still struggle with it, but the eye is usually bigger than you think it should be, but it might be too big as well. So just be careful with all this and try your best to get it the way you think it should be anyways. A lot of times I think it needs to go out a little bit more, but whatever the case. All right. So if I do an eyeball like this, I can add a mirror modifier. I can eye drop and pick the base mesh. And now we'll have crazy eyes. So this here is great because what we're going to do is we're going to select the base mesh, go back into sculpt mode. And what I like to do is you might have to remesh first if you got a bunch of crazy stuff going on, but you use the inflate tool and you do little circles. And what I try to do is build up the outside just a little bit until it starts covering it up like this. You see? You do this very small, and then you start doing those little circles in the middle or towards the middle. And I'm just going to cover up the eye shape, right? Sphere. This is just my strategy. There's other strategies out there, I'm sure, but I think this works out pretty well. So you just cover it up a little bit. You can, when you get to this point, you see those folds taking effect. Just Control R, and that'll get rid of the fold. So now we can remesh, get rid of the fold. We have this going on. In Edit Preferences, under Navigation, you can turn it to Trackball. If you're using a graphics tablet, you might want to spin sometimes. So basically, it's going to be a little bit harder to control the 3D view, but it's actually very useful. You'll get kind of used to it. It's kind of like ZBrush in a way. So now we can get in here, though, and let me set the display to random again. We can use something like Draw Sharp, for example. And all we have to do is go in here and draw sharp until we cut back into that eye. Oops, that is not the one I was looking for. Random. There we go. And we can just push that in a little and create the shape of the eye, basically. All right. So we can do that very quickly, and you can see it works out okay. We could definitely pull these out a little bit further, maybe for the top one. And then the bottom one we can make a little bit thicker. And we can start to just add whatever we need here as far as an eye goes. You know, just look at your reference images and just kind of dissect, you know, what goes on with the human eye and like how much depth there is to things. Because you need that little piece there, which you can do later on. You don't have to do right away. But this might like tuck in here just in a very specific way and run out like this, right? So you'll have to play around with the depth, the shapes, the overall form, basically. So like this might all blend out a little bit or something like that. And usually the human eye does something kind of like that anyways. So that's a good starting point at least. And then we can go back through this basically, and I keep working it now at this point, right? We can smooth some of that out or fill it, whatever we got to do. The side of the head here, usually, yeah, it's a little bit more planar in the reference at least, but I'm not so worried about that. What I am worried about is this edge up here. I'm going to scrape it a tiny bit so that I can bring down that surface a little bit right there. And I want that to kind of wrap back around and feed back into this area a little bit. Might be a little bit further out. I'm not real sure. I need a reference for it. I don't have it right now, but for the most part, yeah, you can see it. This is going fairly well. Smooth all that down. And then this is really where it kind of takes off, in my opinion. Basically, all these really sharp edges we've just been creating, we can smooth them down a tiny bit, right? And certain ones you'll smooth down more than others, but you can go through here and you can use clay strips. You can build some areas up a little, smooth it down. So clay strips and build up is actually probably the better way of going for a lot of your details on the surface, because you can do it like this. And this is the way more or less typical sculptors, traditional sculptors would work anyways, where they just kind of work surfaces by scraping a little, or they would add a little bit of material, right, if needed, if they're working with clay at least, not something like marble, but it add a little bit of material as needed. So we can work it out. We can start to make these round just the way we want, just like 2D drawing. You're controlling edges and gradients. That's the big thing, right? So, you know, you just keep at it. You might do like a little dip in here a little bit, which we already kind of got going with the planes, so we're not going to. But a lot of times, if that was completely flat, you would just cut and do this. And you can see how that starts to work out anyways. So the chin, we might level out a little bit better down here. And now we get to start thinking about, you know, if this is an old person, a young person, or whatever the case, we would start making changes accordingly, as far as like thickening the face up with the fat pads and things like that. So, or muscular structure, are they very muscular or not as well, right? But basically, just like that, with, you know, very limited knowledge and just relying off references and that planar head and the Lumis method, you're kind of getting started now, right? You should be feeling a little bit more confident approaching a sculpt like this, at least. After watching this video and putting this into practice, you'll feel a lot more confident, at least, about working these kinds of little areas out. And so as you round out these edges, just a little bit at least, takes a little bit of that sharpness away. It starts to look more and more, well, as you know, as a human, a little bit more organic, right? And that's kind of the cool thing there, is we can just keep doing that number, maybe blend that out a bit there. You can still build things up a little bit. Not everything's going to be, perfectly a planner like that, right? In those exact shapes, but it's a good practice exercise, at least, to get to this point. Now you're going to feel, just a little bit more confident in yourself, a little bit better, like you're better able to manage or tackle something like this. It gives you a little bit of chance to just play around with the idea of the brush tools as well. Not worry about creating a super clean, high detailed human, basically, right? As you can see, we can start blending. We can raise surfaces still and create little sharp areas if needed, and kind of round them out. Fix things if that's if that's really needed, anyways. I want to blend all that in a little bit more. Not quite so sharp. You can see the planner surfaces are still there underneath, but they're just rounded a little bit. That's it. That's really it, guys. And so whenever you're working on any sculpt, you go for that big, basic, primitive shape first, no matter what it is. And then you can do it in separate parts and pieces if needed. You can Alt-Q between parts and pieces. Like if I wanted to switch to the eye, I can Alt-Q to it, right? So Alt-Q is very useful. And then now, basically, we can just make sure all of our forms are just the way we want them. And we can slowly start to finesse it into a more proper kind of 3D sculpt. And that's really what sculpting is. It's about finessing it, doing little circles, little back and forth motions, using very light pressure. You can definitely finesse things together quite a bit. And like maybe that's too much in that area, you see? And this is where the fun begins, because once you get to this point of understanding the basics of creating form, now you're golden, because you can come in, you can do rather dramatic changes still. You might blend other areas together that you didn't realize you were going to blend at all. These in here. These should actually blend a little bit more together in this area. So we use the fill tool. We might just fill the areas like that. Okay. You see how that works out? We do little circles or little back and forth motions. And then we smooth it. So we can start to develop the human character. Now, this is where really you're going to want to spend most of your time at this point. You might take it up a little bit more in resolution. That's fine. You don't have to go too crazy with it, but you take it up a little bit more in resolution. You can go back in here. You can, remesh as needed, fix little issues, try to add as much detail as you need. And you just keep sculpting for a minute. You should have more or less a very clean representation of what it is you're trying to create, even if it has a little bit of like weird faceting in the faces and stuff. Generally, that's okay, because you're going to retopo this more or less, right? And so retopo takes a little bit. I'm not going to show retopo in this video, but you could clean it up with a retopo and you'd have more or less, after that, the base of your production model if you need it. So that's just, an option to you to work in that manner. There's nothing that says you don't just take this and straight bake it to a low poly mesh and try to use it as a game model either. If you tie enough resolution, you can get away with that. Okay. But it's a little bit more challenging in some respects. Like this whole area is a little bit off or wrong. The clay buildup is actually really good for these kinds of areas like this, because you can just knock in a little, then smooth it down a little bit easier, I think, than the draw tool. Okay. But yeah, we could dig into areas. I don't know if this is entirely correct back here. I don't know much about anatomy. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to look up a reference image if I'm working this area, and I'm just going to focus on doing just this area just right now. Because the big basic forms are in, right? That's all that matters, is that we got some of the basic forms going. We've attached some of this here. Maybe this is too thick. We can definitely work things like this out, just doing lots of little strokes. You do have to correct kind of dips and stuff manually, so just be warned of that. A lot of times you want to try to keep your strokes nice and clean and even all the way down. So your brushwork is important, basically, is all I'm getting at. And you're going to want to work all these kinds of things out little by little, anyways. So, like, we could facet that out if we wanted to. We could smooth this down. We can just do whatever we got to do at this point. If you want to smooth a specific area, you can always use a mask, mask it out, right? Say we want to smooth the whole top of the head here for some reason. Right? And the mask tool, you can hold shift on it. You can actually blend it if you wanted to. You can make it softer, or you can smooth mask here, and then turn auto off, and you can change the amount. But that one works okay. But we can hold shift, and we can do it too. So let's say we wanted to, smooth all that. We can invert it. We can use mesh filter, set it to smooth. Click and drag to the right, and it should start smoothing it out. Might take a couple times, but there we go. If it's depending on the resolution, when it's low resolution, it smooths faster. When it's high resolution, it smooths slower. And then we press A and clear, and we'll have this, right? So now we can take the smooth tool itself. If we want nicer, smooth surfaces, we can turn down the strength on it, perhaps. Run around in here, do little back and forth motions. Use it like a sander almost, if you're used to working with hardware and tools and all that, right? Back and forth, little circles. If you go over an edge, obviously it's going to start to break it down a little bit. So if I use it more aggressively, see, that probably comes out quite a bit. We're pretty high resolution now, so you can see the smooth tool really starts to slow down at this point, and so the scraper becomes more than likely your tool of choice to knock off edges. But yeah, you can still use the smooth tool as well, especially on smaller areas, because if you're working very small, it still flattens very rapidly, all right? It's just how the tool behaves with when you're doing lots of faces as opposed to like a small amount of faces. Yep, but then that's pretty much the rough idea here. So the rest comes down to detailing, which, you're going to have to just do that on your own for the most part, because otherwise we'll have a forever long video maybe. But basically, eventually you're going to get in here at some point and you're going to start detailing things where you're playing around with the shapes of the lips and how they go together. This like bottom lip might have a little bit of a ridge, and it dies off as it goes into this area, like smooths out. Maybe take that smooth tool now and turn it down to strength again. So we might still be doing that. We might still need to flatten areas. That's why you might not turn the smooth tool down at all. You might use draw sharps. You might start trying to add in the idea of certain little features. Might use it a little bit larger. Okay. So we can start to create those kinds of features perhaps. These corners of the mouth are always going to give you the most problem. There's actually like a little buildup right here. And then it dips kind of a little bit up here. And it dips more down here, obviously, right? And then that fades out or something like that. And then this has a built up section in here as well that we kind of started, but it didn't get quite right. And so now this is where anatomy studies come into play. It starts to really help you out with the detailing phase, right? So you'll be able to identify little nuanced things that need to happen or occur. You still use just regular draw tools. Pull that up, the nostrils. Maybe we push them in it a little bit like this, slight angle perhaps. There's different types of nostril shapes, obviously, in real people. They aren't all like exactly the same academic lesson, perhaps. So, just pay attention to your reference images. Try to work off of a real person if you can. It's always helpful, or just rely heavily off of the anatomy references at least. So like, these will start to flatten out in here in kind of interesting ways. Like you might flatten out a little bit more over here and dig in a little in this area, or ball out there. So little things like that can start to happen. Like this whole lip might just ball out a little bit on the sides. Something like that, maybe. Kind of cool, right? And because of that, these need to be raised up a little bit more. We have a little bit more form here. So it's actually kind of good to exaggerate your forms to some degree and maybe work them back a little bit. Or you can build them up very slowly, which is kind of what I'm doing right here. Right? And I'm not trying to go all the way at them right now. I'm just trying to build them up a little bit slower. This usually creates like a W shape in here, but I always get it wrong. So I'm not, you're like, once again, I don't practice this stuff really that much. I did a little bit of practice before this video just so I make sure I'm feeding you guys good info, but it's not no, I don't do studies too regularly. I've done a few studies in the past on anatomy, but and sculpting, doing likeness sculpts, things like that, and I do okay at it with enough time, but it's just I don't really typically enjoy it all that much as far as like doing people. Now, if it was creatures or something like that, I typically enjoy it, but you get a little bit more creative freedom on a topic like that, and I like the creativity aspect. So, but that's not to say you don't have quite a bit on humans either. Just you're always working with a human. You know what I'm saying? Whereas like creatures, they can be any kind of creature, and you can create new creatures, and I like that a lot. So this nose is definitely messed up, and I have a feeling I need a little bit more resolution to kind of get the shapes in here that I want. But yeah, the nose can be very tricky, especially without reference, which is what I'm doing right now. So do rely off reference, guys. I'm telling you, reference, reference, reference. It's one of the best things you can ever do is just kind of go through at your own pace, look at your references, and just really critically think about what you're doing, and then try to use the tools to make it happen, right? If you don't have a great understanding of the tools, it's okay. You'll pick them up over the years. There's lots of tools in Blender. And but the sculpting tools, you should learn most of these relatively fast because they're kind of straightforward, to be honest. A lot of these sculpting tools aren't really that hard to learn because they only have like two functions, generally speaking. Some of them can be modified in little interesting ways, but they're not too crazy, basically. So you'll get the hang of it before you know it. Very easy to mess up the shapes, though, and but just going back and forth is valid, right? Like you can just go back and forth until you start getting it more and more correct. Wanted to work that a little bit deeper, but you can see as I use the draw tool kind of basically it's like extrude along normals of sorts. Um, the build up tools don't really do that, so they can dig. They're kind of like a regular extrusion or something. That's the way I look at them, anyways. But they let you dig a little bit better, and you can remesh as needed, and they can dig a little bit more. But they're very similar in some respects, so not entirely different. Yeah, so right at this point, this is where I would go ahead and start um, looking at up close references and anatomy and whatever. Right, I want to get the nose just right. I'm going to keep working it basically. Right, if I want the eyelids just right, I would keep working it. If I want the little muscle buildup or the little fat pads or whatever built up, I'm going to keep working it because you could do things like masks, for example. You could create a shape somewhere. Like that you want this right here, just in a very particular way. And then maybe you want to blur out on the end. This is where the mask tool kind of comes back to life a little bit to some degree. Because you can blur things out. And then so you could just use invert, use mesh filter, set it to inflate. And you might be able to pull it out like that, right? You can see that's not exactly what I wanted there, believe it or not. I actually want this to fade out a little too, right? Now we do that inflate. It's a little bit different now, okay? So we inflate it, and then maybe we go back through with a regular brush, and we hold shift and smooth it down. So we can finesse things in all kinds of fun little ways like this. You can see that worked out pretty well. Maybe we even hold control and draw into it a little bit. You see? So use masks as well, guys. Don't be afraid of these things because there might be a little bit of fat somewhere underneath the eye or something like that you got to create. Some tissue anyways, and maybe a muscle, who knows? I don't even know what that is right there. I just know it exists. And that's how you do that, guys. You can work it back in here in the mask, right? And so this is where we're going to end up really being able to explore doing the higher fidelity aspects, and really the anatomy starts to become more important because like at some point, like I wouldn't do wrinkles unless they were real big, right? Like I wouldn't do fine wrinkles. I'd probably do that in something like Substance or whatever the case. Maybe here in Blender with like creating a bump map or something. But the main thing is that like this is where we get to start exploring all of our little nuanced details. Like if we want a little bulge to the nose, like we can do that. We want a little bit of more fat on the cheeks here. We can start doing that. We can thicken this character up maybe. You see where I'm going with this? So, like, we can have fun with it basically at this point. And, we can still take the resolution higher. Like, typically, if you're going to go to a subdivision mesh, you don't have to go very high. You'd retopo the subdivision mesh basically. But if you want to keep working higher and higher detail, there's nothing to stop you. Okay. If you want to go up to 1 million, you want to go up to 2 million faces, then so be it. Go for it. Um, Personally, I would go a little bit higher than this just so I can work out the sections of the eyes and the lips a little bit better. But that's kind of it right there. And the rest comes down to finesse of working the surfaces and just getting them a little bit nicer, perhaps. And maybe you want to like resharpen some areas compared to others or whatever the case. Maybe you just want to make a little bit more rounded and not so squared up or whatever. You can start doing that basically. Maybe we build this up and then soften it on the ends. You know what I'm saying? So this is your opportunity to start doing those kinds of little details. And it's very easy to end up with lumpy surfaces if you're not careful. Just mask it out, and if you want everything to be super flat, mask it out and smooth it a bit. You don't have to over smooth it, but you can use a smooth tool or a mesh filter smooth. You got to jump back and forth on that, but click and drag to the right, all that will become more flat basically. Within reason anyways. You'll see because we did it that way, you get this little kind of edge on it. We just go back with the regular smooth tool and we can knock that out too. Okay. So lots of interesting little ways of working. You certainly could go for that strategy there if you wanted on any given little section or part piece. And for the most part, and it's shaded flat right now. So right click, shade it smooth if you want. I think it looks better flat while sculpting, but you can start to see very careful or quickly, like where you have some discrepancies and things like that. These lips are pretty rough still. It's like, that does not look correct at all, right? So you might want to fix something like that if that's occurring. Turn it back to flat shading. It looked okay, but here, not so much. Let's fix that, I guess. Right? Yeah, could go a little bit higher resolution in this area. I think it wouldn't hurt it either. So we can bump it up a bit. These disappear at some point, which drives me nuts. I wish we had a little square show up here instead for the remesher, but whatever the case, it still works. It's supposed to be like a view of the grid on the mesh so that you know how detailed it would be. Unfortunately, when you're zoomed in really far and you're remeshing, you can't tell where that grid is anymore. Let me look at a reference image for this one real quick so I don't do them too terribly wrong. I was going for a male model and I end up might want to do like more of a female looking lips accident because that's the only reference I got. Yeah, so we can definitely work them out. Round that a little bit more, maybe. You see? Overall, yeah, I'd have to finesse it probably a little bit just to get it all in the right kind of shapes I want. But for the most part, it's pretty solid, and I'm not too upset with this area. Might be a little bit higher right here. Yeah, I'm not too upset with this area. I could probably work it out from here. This gets pushed in. This is why I was talking about pushing this in right here. This little section likes to run out to like a little crevice almost, like a fold. And then that kind of blends out right there. Something like that anyway. So you can see that worked out pretty well. And like this gets a little softer down here and it's a little crispier up here. So little subtle things, guys, when it comes to the sculpting itself, very easy to get things wrong. Wrong kind of like direction of the plane of the surface. And might run out of resolution if you needed a certain amount of detail. Might have to push those in a little bit more, for example. And when we do that, we might lose the edge here. But mainly, you're going to find that it's not really that bad. Like, you're going to have a lot of fun with this. especially as you like cook out a model and you end up realizing that like you can get them done in a reasonable amount of time usually. They don't have to be like big nightmare chores after a little while. And I've only done a couple characters myself, like since I've done 3D, and it's not my cup of tea. It might not be yours, but it's good practice. Even if you're doing like hard surface stuff, it really it forces you to do a little bit more attention to detail. Basically, like it really makes you slow down and think about things. And so you're going to even do this on your hard surface projects at a certain point. So it is good practice, and I would recommend doing at least what I'm showing here. I maybe don't have to, do a full on study of everything as far as anatomy goes, but you take your time to do a little bit of a study and then practice a little bit of sculpting. Have fun with it, guys. Do not be afraid of this. It's just a growing project, if you would. Like it's one of the things that I really feel like if more artists spent more time just focusing on sculpting alone and retopo work, they'd probably grow as artists a lot faster. Okay? It's not a hard strategy. It's actually very simple, but it's something that people are terrified of doing for whatever reason, and it hurts them ultimately in the long run. So I'm just going to soften all that in there for now, so it just looks a little bit nicer. But definitely would want to do the lips in a little bit more detail, I think. So yeah, I think we'll just soften that too. Yeah, I just want to look more natural, so when I thumbnail this out for the YouTube video, obviously it doesn't look as quite as crazy in that area, maybe. But it's definitely got some shape to it that's wrong, right? And that's where you're going to struggle the most. So, like getting to this point that we just got to, um, it's going to take you a little while at first. It's not going to be an instant thing. It doesn't happen by accident necessarily, but you're going to spend most of your time probably just finessing detail. To be honest, that's probably where you're going to spend most of your time. I think that looks better. Maybe not great, but it's a little bit better. I kind of want to round these out down here a little bit more, and then bring it back that way. Then just flatten all this out a little. It makes the lips much bigger. So if we gotta, like go through, fill, remesh, whatever, so be it. But I don't want them too flat, right? Like they're still pretty flat. I think they're kind of a nice curve now, but you just don't want them to be flat. That's the thing. They got to kind of wrap around a curve on as the base mesh of the model, anyways. So you can look at them from the top, like they're a little bit curved, all right. So we're kind of there, maybe not perfectly, but we're kind of there. If we have to redo the whole mouth for whatever reason, that's a possibility. Just do it. Don't try to fight with it too much. Like if it's not going right, just you have to start over and do it. All it takes sometimes is just just a little adjustment to the base that you're sculpting on is sometimes what it takes. You could try using like the elastic grab tool. Elastic grab is really great. It's kind of like turning the whole thing into rubber. But if you pull like here back, this might be okay. So we could actually curve the mouth a little bit more, but it kind of messes things up a little bit. And we might have to like pull the middle back out a little. And then the nose shifts a tiny bit. Who knows? There's all kinds of things that could be going on here. You see like the chin, like maybe we can fix that chin a little bit. But if we're not careful, if we move in one direction, it moves in other directions as well, right? So like the side might look right, but the front might look terrible, right? You got to be careful with stuff like that and try to work that out anyways. So I want to get rid of this nasty chin a little bit. I think it's a little too large. I'm going to smooth all this down. You can see we got like these little, there's like little lines here. That was probably caused by the elastic grab. You got to be careful with stuff like that too. And this would probably, go in with a little bit more fat and stuff under here and skin and all that, right? So smooth tool is not doing much work right now. Okay, it was down. That's why. I was like, it should be smoothing a little faster, but it is not. And a little adjustment, it smooths a little bit faster now. So you can see it's all about subtlety. When you can be aggressive with a sculpt, be aggressive, right? When you need to slow down and you're going for more detail or whatever, slow down. Don't try to do it as aggressive then. So if we wanted to make this look more like a female character, basically we would go through and finesse it a little bit more and make some of the features a little softer, maybe the chin a little bit more narrow and stuff like that, right? A little hard to do now because we'd have to use grab tool or elastic grab, and it would work out, but you'd have to repair quite a bit. So just keep that in mind. That's why it's so important to get the base right, in my opinion, before you get to this kind of level here. And then as long as that base is correct, you should be okay. See, just elastic grabbing in there, shifting the eyeballs around or the eyelids. Like that might be a better chance to just use grab tool. But even then, it's still kind of, a little questionable maybe, right? I'm not worried about this too much because I know I can just push it back in with like the draw tool. Not really a big deal. We can actually push it in quite heavily too. So if we wanted to hide the eyes, we grab them, press H in object mode, go back to sculpt mode. We might be able to push this in quite heavily in this area. So we don't run into that issue as much, right? You can see even if you just used a sphere as the template, like it works, right? We'd actually be kind of in the right areas for an eye now. Just want to push it in though so we don't run into that issue again. Remesh it as needed. So now when I Alt H in object mode, it should come back a little. There you go. So basically we can touch them up and refine them as needed. All right. I don't think the outer eye is doing quite right, but yeah. Sometimes you got to push them a little, smooth them a little, and occasionally you'll have to remesh when it's like that and then smooth it. So and just sometimes the regular draw tool won't work out for this stuff. So clay strips or clay tool is the better option because the clay tool acts like a fill tool to some degree. Clay strips and clay. So we might be able to work that out a little bit nicer in there. Who knows? But yeah, any of the details, the elements like the eyes, the nose, they're really going to give you a run for your money. I think ultimately when it comes to like fine detail, I don't think you need much more resolution than this, but maybe a tiny bit. You definitely go up much higher if you need to, but yeah, just trying to finesse them into position and into place can be a little bit challenging, right? There's very specific shapes in here for things that's very hard to get right. And so this is where most of the time you're just gonna slow down. You're gonna realize like why characters can be so hard to create. Basically, it's not just about the base form; it's about doing all of this too. Like little tiny muscles and little shape changes to like the tear ducts or whatever. Like this might be pushed in slightly more here, and this blends out a certain way. This kind of stuff eats up a lot of time. Possibly there might be a little bit more fat in here, stuff like that, or more skin or something. And you got to blend it out just right, maybe. So it means you got to, if you zoom in or zoom out, your brush changes size. So you might have to blend that a little bit differently, like it's more soft over here, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, you get the idea, right? We can make it happen though. And so that's really not that bad. Now, I'm not going to go over retopo, but I just want to point this out real quick. Why a lot of times character models look as good as the way they look anyways is because you'll eventually retopo it, right? I'm just going to quad remesh it at 10,000 real quick, symmetry X, default settings for the most part. I'm just going to remesh it with quad remesher. This will also probably show why you don't want to use quad remesher for end result character models. But basically, first, it's probably too dense. It might be too dense. It might not be, but it doesn't always get the topo just right. This one actually came out fairly well, but little things in the corner of the lips, for example, you want to get just perfect, right? That probably wouldn't work there. And but the rest of it's actually not too bad, surprisingly. You could probably get away with just animating this, if you, except for the lips, maybe you'd have to correct. And then some of the other things might fold weird that I don't really know about too much because I don't rig faces up every day. But yeah, that's the main idea, is that eventually you retopo, you get something a little bit closer to this. And when this is subdividing, you can see the difference between the voxels and the subdivision mesh. This is much softer right now, but the main idea still stands, that you're able to render a much higher resolution mesh, basically, right? So it works out much better for rendering, and then this also looks really good when it bakes as well. On top of subdivision, you can use, in sculpt mode, with control 1 through 5, we add a multi-resolution modifier, right? So we can still sculpt on something like this if we wanted to, and add a bunch of little wrinkles and stuff like that. This is the time to do that, not necessarily the other one, because you know you would be trying to retopo all the wrinkles, and that's not a good time to do it necessarily. So you'd probably use, like, this is the time you'd start using increase polish maybe. You might use it over there as well, but this is what I'm talking about. Basically, like, you can start doing some real finesse work at this point, like very detailed stuff, if you need it. I don't know what wrinkles look like exactly in this area, but there's something like this, right? So you can see we can work it out. If it's not high enough resolution, you add more to it. So 2 million even. All right, because this basically, the multi-res acts something like a displacement map. Might not be exact, but it's something kind of like it anyways. So you can get in here, you can do all this. This is where, if you're watching time lapses of people putting together characters, more than likely they do this rough sculpt, then they retopo it manually, and then they just start doing this. Okay, that's all I'm trying to point out here. If you ever see it in a time lapse, now you know what you're looking at. So you can go crazy with detail at this point, right? Also, multi-res has a multi-res eraser, which is really good. So you really don't want to do big changes with multi-res. You want to do minor stuff. And that way you can erase those little minor things if needed, all right? But if you did like big changes, like you use the inflate tool, then if you ever had like detail on this area, like you had went through and, I don't know, draw sharpen here or something, you had some kind of detail and you try to erase that detail, you erase the whole thing. So yeah, little tiny details is usually the best way you can work with the multi-res, in my opinion anyways. So, but all in all, you can see you can go through and erase everything we just did. And that's going to give you ultimately that better looking mesh. And so you can have the preview amount to 0 if you want, but you can also have the preview up as well. Okay. Basically, when it was down at 0 and it up at 4, in this case, 5 million triangles or whatever, keep it at 3. You don't have to turn it up all the way necessarily. Right, yeah, so eyeballs, if we wanted to transfer them over here, just duplicate one. Oh, not the head, too. Just eyeball. Shift D to duplicate, right click, G, X, or Shift D and hit X. Just re-reference the base mesh and try to get it lined back up, appropriately. I usually put the eyes maybe too far forward. It happens quite a bit, so I might just move them back a little bit, and I might have to change the shape around them a little bit as well by the looks of it. So pretty rough, but yeah, you get the idea, right? This is a process. It's something you can do, and it's really not that crazy, right? And then you would end up, if you're doing more static mesh, maybe, or you're just doing sculpting for fun, you might actually sculpt hair. Otherwise, you're going to use like hair cards and texturing and all the other fun stuff. So, but ultimately, yeah, it doesn't work out too bad. You can see here how these poles really start to influence this area. This is an end pole and an end pole and an E pole right next to each other. Yeah, so from back here, it looks terrible. And this is why manual retopo is so important. Okay. Little things like this start to add up basically. But yeah, I mean, that's the process, guys. So if you want to mess around with it, try to get a character going, this is the base. You can start refining this, taking it further. Well, maybe not the subdivision one, but the voxel one, should I say. This is the base. And you can start working this out. The multi-res not found for Space View 3D, because this is not a multi-res mesh. So I guess the eraser, it's trying to use it, but it's not there. That's a bug. Okay. Blender does have bugs all over. I find them all the time. It's like little things like that usually, but sometimes they're bigger. But yeah, Blender does have bugs. So anyways, that's it for this video, guys. I think most of you can take it from here and kind of create whatever it is that you want to create, but hopefully it helps you out. Hope you enjoyed the video. So if you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, all the fun stuff, and we'll check you out in the next one. All right, take care.